Thank you for letting the night find you here. Right now, inside your skull, the day is still humming. Every face you passed, every word you half heard, every small thing you meant to remember. Your brain took all of it in and wired it into new connections. Thousands upon thousands of them, laid down in a single waking day. You might imagine that sleep exists to lock those connections into place, to guard the day's learning like treasure. But your brain has a stranger habit than keeping. As you sink toward the deepest sleep, it starts quietly turning most of those connections down, loosening them, thinning them, letting them fade. Why would a mind built to remember spend its darkest, quietest hours weakening almost everything it worked so hard to learn? There is nothing here you need to hold on to. Let the day soften on its own, unfiled, gently let go of, the way a room grows dim when no one is watching. Welcome to Sleepy Science Night. Let that single question drift down beside you as the room goes still. Why would the night undo so much of what the day so carefully put in? And what could your brain possibly be protecting by letting it go? Tonight, lie still and let one quiet question settle beneath everything we explore. Why would your brain spend the dark hours weakening almost everything you learned today? Instead of carefully saving it, it feels backward. You worked to take things in. A name, a route home, a worry you turned over and over. You might expect sleep to lock all of it down, like a librarian shelving every page. But the night does something stranger and gentler. Your sleeping brain leans toward letting go, not holding on. That paradox is where this hour lives, and you don't have to solve it. You can simply let it rest in the dark with you, unanswered for now, while the noise of the day begins to loosen its grip and your breathing slows. You are not really one mind tonight. You are a network of roughly 86 billion neurons, each one whispering to thousands of others. The human brain holds something on the order of 100 trillion connections, called synapses, and they are the meeting points where one cell passes a signal to the next. This count comes from careful tissue studies summarized by researchers like Susanna Herculano-Hausel. Every thought you had today nudged some of those junctions to grow a little stronger. The crowded, restless feeling in your head right now is partly just the connections, freshly tightened, still humming. And the quiet truth is that every human head carries the same vast, murmuring web, including everyone else lying awake tonight, in every time zone, under every kind of roof. Learning, at the smallest scale, is mostly synapses getting stronger. When two neurons fire together often enough, the link between them grows. Neuroscientists shorten this to cells that fire together, wire together. After the work of Donald Hebb, a new face, a new fact, a new fear. Each one leaves a faint physical change in that connective web. The trouble is that you learn constantly, all day, without choosing to. Every glance, every overheard sentence, every flicker of attention strengthens something. By nightfall, your brain is denser with new links than it was at dawn. That is why a busy day can leave your head feeling overfull. And it hints at why the night might have its own quiet job to do. 1. It has not yet started. As you lie here, there is a hidden cost to a brain that only strengthens. Stronger synapses are larger, hungrier, and more demanding. They take up space, burn energy, and need raw materials to maintain. If your connections only ever grew, day after day, the system would eventually run out of room and resources to keep learning. Scientists call this a saturation problem. A sponge can only soak up so much before it can hold no more. Your brain faces the same limit, and it reaches toward that limit a little more with every waking hour. So somewhere in the design of the mind, there has to be a counterweight, a way to make room again. What that counterweight is, and when it works, is the mystery this hour slowly opens. This is where two scientists, Giulio Tononi and Chiara Cirelli, offered a quiet idea called the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis. Their proposal, developed over the past 2 decades, is simple to say and strange to absorb. While you are awake, your synapses mostly grow stronger, and while you sleep deeply, your brain broadly weakens them back down again. Not at random, and not to erase you, but to renormalize, to return the whole web to a calmer baseline. Sleep, in this view, may be the price the brain pays for the plasticity of being awake. The settling you feel as you drift off could be that great quieting beginning. Your mind isn't shutting off. It is doing something more interesting, and we have only started to see what. The deepest part of this work happens during what is called slow-wave sleep. In these stages, your brain doesn't go silent. Instead, vast populations of neurons fall into a slow, synchronized rhythm, rising and falling together about once every second. You can see these slow waves clearly on a recording of brain activity, broad and unhurried. Nothing like the fast chatter of waking. This rhythm sweeps across the whole cortex, like a tide moving over a shoreline. Researchers believe these slow waves are not just a sign of rest, but part of the mechanism itself, the very motion that allows connections to be gently turned down. As you sink toward that depth tonight, your brain prepares to ride those long, even waves, and you do not have to steer. Slow-wave sleep is most abundant early in the night, in the first few hours after you fall asleep. This is when your brain takes its deepest plunge, and when the rebalancing is thought to be most active. It is also the sleep that is hardest to wake from, the heavy, dreamless kind you fall into when you are truly exhausted. There is a tender logic here. The more you took in during the day, the more your brain has to settle, and the more deeply it tends to fall. So a crowded, demanding day often earns a heavier early night. The fullness in your head is not a problem to fix. It is, quietly, an invitation to go deep, and the invitation grows stronger the more still you become. Here is something gentle to notice. The slow waves of deep sleep seem to lower synaptic strength in a way that is graded, not uniform. Studies of sleeping brains suggest the largest, most active connections from the day are eased down the most, while smaller ones change less. It is less like erasing a chalkboard and more like lowering the volume on everything at once. Knob be knob. If almost everything softens together, then maybe the night's task isn't picking what to throw away. It may be making the whole field quieter so that something can eventually stand out. The question we opened is beginning to stir, but it has not yet turned over. Why? Weaken what you learned. We are still only leaning toward the answer. Think of your daytime mind as a forest where every tree grows at once. By evening, the canopy is so thick and tangled that light barely reaches the ground, and no single tree stands apart. Your brain's connections can become like that, so many of them strengthened, that the truly important signals get lost in the crowd. Neuroscientists describe this as a falling signal-to-noise ratio. More and more is loud, so nothing is clearly heard. This is the quiet crisis a full day creates inside your head. And it points toward what the night might be for. Not adding more, but perhaps thinning the canopy, so that a little light can find the forest floor again. Whether that is truly the night's purpose is the thread we keep following. There is one thing worth holding on to as you settle in. When your brain lowers a synapse during deep sleep, it usually doesn't cut the connection entirely. It turns it down toward a lower baseline. The link still exists. It simply grows quieter. Researchers studying this process find broad reductions in synaptic strength across sleep, not wholesale destruction. So the memory of today is not being thrown away tonight. It is being softened, along with almost everything else. The version of you that wakes tomorrow will still carry the day, just lighter, less cluttered, the loudest noise turned down a little. That is a kinder picture of forgetting than most of us were ever offered, though what it finally means is still unfolding ahead of us. There is even a way to see this rebalancing in the structure of the synapses themselves. In careful studies of mouse brains, researchers led by Cirelli and Tononi measured thousands of synaptic connections. On average, they were physically smaller after sleep than after a stretch of being awake. The shrinkage was modest, a small percentage, and, strikingly, it spared the very largest connections. The brain seemed to trim broadly while leaving its strongest links alone. You can picture it as a gardener pruning a hedge overnight. Most branches shortened a touch, the main limbs left standing. The shape that remains is leaner, but the structure that mattered is still there, waiting for morning. Why the largest was spared is a clue we will return to. Notice that this pruning is selective in a quiet, automatic way. By turning almost everything down, but sparing the strongest connections, the brain doesn't need to decide, fact by fact, what to keep. The strongest links, the things you met often or that mattered most, survive simply by staying above the new, lower baseline. It is sorting without a sorter, judgment without a judge. There is something restful in that. You don't have to lie here reviewing what was important and what wasn't. The mechanism handles it for you, beneath awareness, while you do nothing at all but breathe and sink. What stays and what fades is not yours to answer in the dark, and it may not even be the brain's to answer directly. The story is not only about weakening. Sleep also seems to actively renew certain connections through what scientists call replay. During deep sleep, the patterns of neural activity from your waking hours can play again. Faster, compressed, as if the brain were rehearsing the day in fast forward. This replay is thought to help some memories settle into longer-term storage. So the night may do two things at once. It quietly turns down the whole crowded field, and it lets a few meaningful patterns run again. Weakening and rehearsal, possibly working together. You don't direct any of it. It unfolds on its own while you rest, your part already finished. How these two processes fit remains one of the open puzzles of sleep science. Consider what this means for that overstuffed feeling you may have right now. A head crowded with fragments, half-finished thoughts, a conversation replaying, a task you didn't get to. In the framework of synaptic homeostasis, that crowding is the natural state of an evening brain. Too many connections strengthened, too much left on. It is not a flaw in you, and it is not a sign that something is wrong. Every mind that learned today arrives at night a little over full. The relief you are waiting for is not something you have to manufacture by trying harder to relax. It appears to be a physical process that begins on its own once you stop. Deep sleep may be the release the crowding was always heading toward. Slow waves don't just happen to the brain. The brain works to produce them. The slow oscillations of deep sleep are generated by the cortex and thalamus together, two regions, handing the rhythm back and forth in a steady, sweeping cycle. Researchers can even encourage these waves with gentle sounds timed to the rhythm, and some studies find this can deepen sleep. This tells us the slow wave is not random noise but a built, purposeful state. Machinery running on schedule. Tonight, your own cortex and thalamus will begin this duet without any instruction from you. The very system that felt so crowded all day is the same one that will quietly carry you down into stillness, one long wave at a time. Whether or not you notice it start, there may be a reason the brain saves this great rebalancing for sleep rather than doing it while you are awake. Turning connections down across the whole cortex would be disruptive to a mind that needs to react, respond, and stay coherent moment to moment. So, evolution seems to have set aside a protected, offline window, the depths of sleep, when the brain can step back from the world and do its maintenance safely. You cannot weaken your synapses and navigate your day at the same time. The two states appear to be kept apart on purpose. This is one reason rest is not optional or lazy. It may be a separate mode the brain must enter to keep working at all, the workshop the daytime never allows. Every animal studied closely seems to need this offline time. Sleep, or something deeply like it, appears across mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, and even simple creatures with only a few hundred neurons. A state this costly and this universal, leaving an animal still and vulnerable for hours, almost certainly serves something essential. The synaptic homeostasis idea offers one reason it could be worth the risk. Any brain that learns must also rebalance, or it may fill up and fail. So the heaviness pulling at your eyes right now connects you to nearly everything alive that has ever had a nervous system. The need you feel tonight is one of the oldest needs there is, though its full purpose is still being uncovered. It helps to picture this quieting not as loss but as restoring contrast. Imagine a photograph where every part has been brightened until the whole image washes out to pale grey. Nothing readable in the glare. That is one way to imagine a brain saturated with too many strengthened connections. Lowering the overall brightness, evenly, is what could bring the shapes back into view. By turning the whole field down during deep sleep, the brain may restore the contrast between what matters and what doesn't. The important signals would reappear, not because they were boosted, but because the surrounding noise was dimmed. If that is right, then forgetting here is how clarity returns. The night wouldn't sharpen the few things worth keeping, it would quiet everything else around them. The brain may also clean itself physically during sleep, in a way that fits this picture of nightly maintenance. Research on the glymphatic system, ledbymaiken-nedergat, found that during sleep, the spaces between brain cells widen and cerebrospinal fluid flows through more freely, washing away metabolic waste. This work has been strongest in mice, and the extent of the same clearing in humans is still being studied and debated. Lowering the connections and clearing the debris may be parts of one larger restoration, or they may be separate stories. Either way, your brain is not merely idle as you drift off. There is a kind of housekeeping happening in the dark that asks nothing of you and that you could not do by trying. You only have to let it begin. Why might any of this feel like relief rather than emptiness? Perhaps because a rebalanced brain is a brain ready to learn again. If your connections only grew, you would eventually be unable to take in anything new. The system would be full. By turning the web back down toward baseline each night, sleep may restore your capacity to absorb tomorrow. In that view, the forgetting is what makes future learning possible. So the things gently faded tonight would not be simply lost. They would clear the way for what you have not yet met. Every morning you wake with room again. That openness you sometimes feel after deep sleep, that sense of a fresh, uncrowded mind, may be the renormalized brain, made ready by everything it let go of in the dark. It is worth being honest about the limits of what we know. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis is a leading and well-supported idea, but it is still debated, and the brain almost certainly does more than one thing in sleep at once. Some studies emphasize broad downscaling. Others highlight the selective strengthening of particular memories. The fuller truth is likely that both happen together. A wide, gentle quieting alongside the protection of what matters most. Science is still mapping exactly how the night balances these. You can let that uncertainty be part of the calm, rather than a reason to worry. You don't need the final answer to benefit from the process. Your brain has been doing this faithfully every night of your life, long before anyone tried to explain it. Here is a thought to carry down with you, without needing to finish it. The question we began with, why weaken almost everything you learned today, is starting to look less like a puzzle and more like a possible kindness built into you. If clarity comes from quieting the field rather than clinging to every detail, then a brain that lets most of today soften may not be failing at all. But we have only glimpsed how it might work, not yet why the design settles this way. The settling you feel could be that process at work. For now, you are not losing the day. You are being relieved of carrying all of it at once. And the deeper you sink toward those slow waves, the more room the night has to keep showing you. Let the breath lengthen, just a little, with no effort to manage it. The widening you just heard about, the spaces inside the brain opening so a quiet tide can move through, is something your own head may lean toward right now, behind your closed eyes, with no instruction from you. There is nothing here you need to keep hold of. The day can stay loud or grow faint. Either way, the settling has already begun on its own. Feel the small heaviness in your shoulders, your jaw, the back of your eyes, and let it be lowered rather than held. From here, we drift a little deeper, and the night carries the rest. You can think of your strongest memories as stones in a riverbed. All day, the water rises. Every new thing you learn adds to the flow, until the whole bed is covered and even the largest stones disappear beneath the surface. Deep sleep may be the water level dropping overnight. As the broad flood of recent connections recedes, the stones that were there all along could emerge again into the air, plain and solid. In this picture, the brain doesn't lift the stones. It lowers the water. What endures wasn't saved by force. It simply outlasted the flood. And what you learn today, that truly mattered, might be among the shapes still standing when the level falls tonight, though which stones remain is not yours to choose. This may be why a good night's sleep so often brings a strange morning clarity. You have likely felt it. A problem that seemed tangled at midnight suddenly looks simple at dawn, or a name you couldn't reach arrives on its own. In the framework of synaptic homeostasis, this makes quiet sense. Overnight, the noisy thicket of weak, recent connections was turned down, leaving the meaningful patterns easier to find. You didn't work harder in your sleep. The field around the answer simply grew quieter. So, the clarity that sometimes greets you in the morning may not be a lucky accident. It could be the lawful result of a brain that spent the night lowering nearly everything on your behalf, while you rested and asked for nothing. So here is where the first stretch of the night leaves you. The crowded, restless head you arrived with is not broken, and it is not yours alone. Every mind that learned today carries a similar overfull web into the dark. And the brain's answer to that fullness does not seem to be clutching tighter, but loosening its grip on much of it, evenly and gently, so that something can shift beneath the noise. What exactly that shift protects is still ahead of us. Settling, so far, looks less like the brain saving everything, and more like the brain doing something quieter with the day. You can let that unfinished thought rest now. There is little for you to sort or hold tonight. The quieting has already begun, and you are allowed to let it carry you down. The settling you feel at night does not begin by pressing save. It begins by lowering the volume on almost everything at once. Through the day, the connections between your neurons grew stronger and more numerous with every hour of learning. Tononi and Shirelli's proposal is that deep sleep exists in part to bring that strength back down. But notice a detail we have not yet weighed. If the night simply weakened everything, memory would erode nightly and vanish over a lifetime. Since it plainly does not, something must be uneven in how the weakening lands. That unevenness, still unexplained here, is the door the next facts walk through. The night's first job may not be keeping the day, but it is clearly not pure erasure either. To picture a synapse, imagine two neurons reaching toward each other across a tiny gap. When you learn something, that gap gets easier to cross, like a path worn smoother by walking. Now add a fact we skipped earlier. Crossing that gap depends on tiny receptors, and the day's learning parks, more of them, at the busiest synapses. Overnight, some of those receptors are drawn back inside the cell, which is one physical way a connection can quietly lose strength. So the smoothing of a path can be undone by removing a little of what made it smooth. This gives the weakening a real mechanism, not just a metaphor. The paths you wore in today are held open by molecules that the night can gently take back there is a real, measurable cost to keeping every connection strong, and it is worth being specific about. The brain is only about 2% of your body weight, yet it burns roughly a fifth of your energy, and much of that fuels the constant chatter across synapses. A stronger synapse costs more to run. If the brain strengthened everything it met and never pulled any of it back, the metabolic bill would climb without limit. Scientists frame this as the brain approaching saturation, a ceiling where both energy and space run short. So the nightly weakening is not loss for its own sake. It reads more like a budget being balanced, the brain quietly bringing its running costs back within what a body can afford. The signature of deep sleep is the slow wave, and its precise shape matters. On an EEG, these waves appear as long, rolling swells, far slower than waking rhythms, and each one contains two phases. In the down state, huge numbers of neurons fall silent together. In the up state, they fire together again. Researchers suspect it is this repeated silencing that gives synapses their chance to lose a little strength, cycle after cycle. So the weakening is not one smooth slide. It happens in pulses, hundreds of them across the night. Each slow wave, a small opportunity for a connection to relax. The rhythm you would see on a monitor is, in this view, the very tempo at which your day is being eased down. Here is a detail that sharpens the picture. The weakening appears to be proportional. Rather than subtracting a fixed amount from every synapse, the brain seems to reduce each by a similar fraction of its strength. That distinction matters enormously. Under proportional scaling, a connection that was 10 times stronger than another stays 10 times stronger afterward, even though both have shrunk. The relationships between memories are preserved while the absolute weight of the whole system comes down. This is a subtle kind of arithmetic, and it is part of why the process is called scaling rather than deleting. The brain isn't ranking your memories one by one. It appears to apply a single quiet rule to all of them and let the proportions hold. This is where the central question begins to sharpen, though not yet to resolve. Why would the brain spend the night lowering almost everything you learned, rather than locking it all in? A first clue is that strengthening everything would leave you with noise, a tangle where nothing stands out against anything else. Proportional weakening, by contrast, could raise the contrast between the meaningful and the trivial without the brain ever having to judge them. But this only pushes the mystery deeper. What decides which faint traces slip below the line entirely, and which survive? We do not have that answer yet. Settling, so far, looks less like saving a file and more like a rule quietly applied to a crowded room. Its full logic still ahead. Sleep researchers have watched this play out in more than one way. Studies using EEG recordings find that the overall strength of slow-wave activity tends to be highest early in the night and measurably lower by morning, consistent with a broad easing over the hours of sleep. In animal studies, scientists examining brain tissue have reported that many synapses look physically smaller after sleep than after waking. So the change is not only electrical but structural, written into the tiny architecture of your neurons while you lie still, asking nothing of you. You do not have to picture it or help it along. The reshaping happens on its own, in two registers at once, quietly turning the day into something lighter to carry into tomorrow. The brain does not do this by thinking about it. The work is carried out by molecules and cells operating far below awareness. Supporting cells called glia help adjust the contacts between neurons, and specific proteins that hold synapses open are quietly regulated across the sleep cycle. Enzymes that were busy strengthening connections by day give way to processes that ease them at night. You do not decide which memories soften and which hold firm, and there is no effort you could make to help. The machinery runs on its own schedule, in the dark, following a chemistry it has followed every night of your life, whether or not the day went the way you hoped. Your only part is to stop and let the handover happen. Timing matters more than you might guess, and it is uneven across the night. The deepest, slowest waves cluster in the first sleep cycles, so the strongest easing is thought to happen before you have been asleep very long. Later cycles tilt toward lighter stages and more dreaming, with less of this deep rebalancing. This is one reason the front of the night carries so much weight for a settled mind, and why sleep that is delayed or broken early on can leave more of the day still loud. The crowded thoughts you lay down with are not meant to be sorted one by one. They are met, mostly, in those first deep hours, long before morning ever asks anything of you again. Forgetting, in this light, is not failure. For most of human history, forgetting was treated as a flaw, a leak in the mind. The synaptic homeostasis view turns that around, but it goes further than saying forgetting is harmless. It proposes that forgetting is an active process the brain spends energy to perform deliberately, night after night. A mind that could not let go would not be wiser for it. It would be jammed, unable to find the thread that matters inside everything it ever touched. Still, calling forgetting active raises a harder question we have not answered. If the brain works to forget, how does it avoid discarding the very things you needed? That tension is what the coming facts begin to open. Not everything fades at the same absolute rate, and the difference may be the heart of it. Because the weakening is proportional, a connection that was used many times starts the night far taller than one formed by a passing glance. After the same fractional trimming, the well-used connection still rises clearly above the baseline, while the faint one may drop beneath it and effectively disappear. So the path you walked repeatedly today, or the moment that moved you, tends to hold its ground, not because it was chosen, but because it had further to fall. The night is not reading your day, and deciding. It may simply be letting height, earned by attention and repetition, do the deciding for it. This may also explain why thinking can feel sharper after real sleep. When the whole field of connections is eased down overnight, the brain could wake with a wider margin, more room to register something new. Researchers describe this as restoring the capacity to learn, almost like resetting the sensitivity of the system after a day of use. The fog you sometimes feel after a poor night may be a brain that never got to complete this easing, still crowded with yesterday. In that case, the clarity after deep sleep would be the contrast the night quietly rebuilt for you. It is a hopeful idea and a partly tested one, and it deepens rather than settles the question of what the night is truly for. The slow waves themselves seem to travel across the brain. Recordings show that a single slow wave often begins in one region and sweeps across the cortex like a tide moving over sand, at a measurable speed. As it passes, it appears to coordinate the easing across widely separated areas, briefly knitting the whole brain into one rhythm. This is not a scatter of local cleanups happening in unconnected corners. It looks like a single, unhurried process moving through the entire landscape of your mind, touching in turn everything you carried in. You can let yourself drift on that same slow tide now, knowing that if this picture holds, it reaches every region in its own time, without any effort or attention from you. There is a deep economy taking shape in all of this, though we have not yet named its purpose fully. By easing connections at night, the brain may protect its ability to strengthen connections by day. The two halves would depend on each other, learning and forgetting, bound together like breathing in and breathing out. You cannot keep filling a vessel that never empties. The hypothesis describes a brain that survives not by hoarding every experience, but by trusting the night to take most of the day's growth back, again and again, so tomorrow still has somewhere to land. Yet an economy explains the trade, not the exact rule behind it. Why the balance settles where it does is a question the next stretch keeps circling. So, the question you came in with, why the brain spends the night lowering almost everything you learned, is turning, but it has not yet fully turned over. We can see now that the brain is not simply discarding your day and not simply keeping it either. It seems to be applying a quiet, proportional rule and letting the shape of your learning fall out of it. What that rule finally protects, and why the design settled on subtraction rather than careful saving, is still just ahead of us. As nearly everything you gathered grows a little fainter tonight, something in the pattern is being preserved. We are close to seeing what, but not there yet. For now, let the loosening continue on its own. Notice how little this asks of you. The very easing we have been describing is unfolding in your own mind right now, while a head that lay down, crowded begins, on its own, to grow quieter and clearer in the dark. There may be a reason the brain eases connections at night, instead of simply adding new ones. And it is partly about wiring, not just energy. Every synapse you keep occupies physical room among densely packed neurons, and space in the skull is finite. A brain that only strengthened would slowly crowd its own circuitry, leaving less room for the new links tomorrow will need. So during deep sleep, slow waves sweep through the cortex and gently turn down most of the day's connections. It is not damage. It looks like housekeeping with a spatial purpose, keeping the wiring diagram from silting up. What the housekeeping ultimately serves is still the open question, but the crowding it relieves is very real. Some of the clearest evidence comes from tracking synaptic strength across a single day and night. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin measured molecular markers of synaptic strength in animals and found a steady climb during waking and a fall during sleep. The proteins that anchor connections in place became more plentiful through the day and thinned out overnight. This rise and fall rhythm repeated on a roughly 24-hour cycle, like a tide that swells while an animal is active and recedes while it rests. The pattern was consistent enough that chance seemed unlikely. Something in sleep appeared to be actively drawing the day's growth back toward a baseline, though the study measured the tide without fully explaining what sets its level. Notice that this broad easing does not, by itself, sort your memories, and that is a crucial gap. If slow waves simply scale almost everything down by the same fraction, the process alone cannot know that a phone number matters less than a face. Proportional scaling preserves the order of your memories, but it does not create that order. The ranking must already exist, laid down during the day by how much each connection was used and how much it mattered in the moment. So the night's arithmetic depends on the day's bookkeeping. This is why the mystery keeps deepening rather than closing. The weakening is real and measured, but the wisdom people attribute to it may partly live in the waking hours before it. Here is why broad easing can be smarter than precise saving. The brain has no reliable way, in the moment, to know which of the day's thousands of new connections will matter next week. Trying to evaluate each one would be slow and error-prone, and it would demand a judge the brain does not seem to have. So instead of guessing, it may let relative strength carry the load. Connections that were used hard and repeatedly begin the night taller, and after everything is scaled down, those are the ones still rising above the noise. In this reading, the brain is not choosing winners directly. It is lowering the water level until only the firmest ground remains above it, and letting the landscape decide. This can explain a feeling you may know well. You go to bed with a head crowded by fragments, names, worries, half-finished thoughts, things you meant to do. By morning, most of that clutter has quietly lost its grip, and only a few clear pieces remain. That is not your imagination tidying itself by luck. It fits what downscaling would predict, thinning the tangle so the signal can surface on its own. The crowded mind you lie down with is not a problem the night ignores. It may be the very thing deep sleep is shaped to meet. But notice we still have not said why the few pieces that remain are the right ones. That question is waiting a little further on. The easing also seems to restore something the day uses up. Responsiveness. When connections grow stronger and stronger, the neurons holding them can become saturated, less able to register anything new against the background of what they already carry. It is like trying to write on a page already dense with ink. A brain that never reset would gradually lose its sensitivity, drowning in its own learning. By scaling connections back overnight, deep sleep may return the neurons to a leaner, more responsive state. You could wake able to be moved again, to notice and absorb, precisely because the night drained off some of the excess that daytime piled on. Whether this is the primary purpose of sleep, or one benefit among several, is still being weighed. There appears to be a cost to skipping this nightly reset, and it is measurable. When deep sleep is cut short, the easing does not finish, and markers of synaptic strength stay elevated closer to their daytime high. People in this state often struggle to take in new information the next day, as if the page were never wiped clean. Studies of sleep loss show learning ability falling, even when someone reports trying just as hard. The effort is there, but the room is not. This is some of the strongest support for the whole idea, because it shows what may go missing when the process is interrupted. The brain seems unable to keep absorbing the world if it never gets the hours to ease what it absorbed before. The process appears strongest in the slowest waves of all. The large, sweeping waves of the night's deepest sleep, sometimes called delta activity, are when the easing is thought to reach its fullest. Each slow wave is a moment when huge populations of neurons fall silent together and then stir again. And within those silent troughs, the weakening is believed to take hold. This may be why fragmented, shallow sleep does so little for a tangled mind. The deepest rebalancing seems to require waves that are allowed to grow long and slow, uninterrupted. The settling you are reaching for tonight likely lives in the lowest, quietest part of the descent, in stretches of sleep that only unbroken hours can build. Step back, and the logic starts to feel almost tender, though it is not yet complete. The brain does not appear to keep the day by clutching at all of it. It may keep the day by letting nearly all of it soften, trusting that whatever truly mattered was built strongly enough to survive the loss. The question we started with, why the brain eases almost everything you learned instead of saving it, is coming closer to its answer here. But one piece is still missing. We can see how strength survives the trimming. We have not yet seen the full reason the design settles this way rather than any other. That last turn is nearly upon us. And until then, weakening looks less like failure and more like method. You just heard that the night may keep what matters by letting almost everything else loosen and fall. And part of you might resist that, the way it can feel safer to hold on to every fragment of the day. Notice the crowding behind your eyes right now. All the half-thoughts you carried into the dark. And let them be lowered rather than sorted. You do not have to decide tonight what stays. The settling is already happening on its own, beneath the noise, while you simply lie here. From here, we go quieter still, and let the slow waves do the rest. Watch how the question keeps shifting shape as we near the center of it. We began by asking why the brain spends the night lowering almost everything you learned. Now, a sharper version comes into view. If the night only subtracts, and the day only adds, then the wisdom of memory may live in the meeting of the two, not in either alone. The few connections that endure are never marked with a special flag we have found. They may simply be the ones left standing once the whole crowded field is lowered around them. That is close to an answer, but not yet the whole of it. What finally decides the height of the line, and why the brain trusts it, is what the last stretch of the night sets out to show. Every brain that has ever slept has eased its own connections at night. This is not a quirk of yours alone, and its reach across life is part of the evidence. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, developed by Tononi and Shirelli, proposes that learning during the day adds synaptic strength almost everywhere, and slow-wave sleep scales that strength back down. Studies in rodents found that markers of synaptic strength rise across waking and fall after deep sleep, matching the idea closely. The crowded feeling you carry to your pillow may be the same overload every learning brain accumulates. Your mind is not failing to quiet itself. It appears to be doing exactly what learning minds are built to do, on a schedule far older than you. Consider more carefully what proportional weakening does to a faint memory versus a strong one. Imagine two connections, one twice as strong as the other. Trim both by, say, a fifth, and the gap between them narrows in absolute terms, but their order never flips. Now imagine, the faint one was already near the threshold below which a synapse effectively goes quiet. The same fractional trim can push it under that line entirely, while the strong one merely thins. So a single, uniform rule can erase the trivial and preserve the important without ever comparing them directly. This is the quiet mathematics beneath a settled mind. The brain does not seem to inspect each memory. It lets subtraction and a threshold do the sorting between them. The slow waves may be more than a signature. They may be the tool itself, dispatched where it is most needed. Regions of the cortex that learn the most during the day tend to show more slow-wave activity that night, as if the brain spends extra rebalancing time exactly where it worked hardest. This local intensity has been measured after focused practice, with the busiest areas producing deeper waves during sleep. So the depth of your sleep is shaped in part by how much your day asked of you and where. It is a targeted rest, not a uniform one. The very places most crowded by today's learning may be the places the night attends to first, without any direction from you. The weakening seems to favor the connections that were used the least, and there is a reason rooted in how synapses hold themselves open. A synapse, fired only once or twice by a passing distraction, never accumulates much of the molecular scaffolding that keeps it strong. So the night's broad easing carries it off with little resistance. A connection reinforced again and again, by attention, by emotion, by repetition, has built enough of that scaffolding to outlast the trimming. This is why the phone number you glanced at fades, while the conversation that moved you remains. The night does not appear to decide what mattered. It lets the things you returned to defend themselves, held up by the very structure repetition built. This same rebalancing shows up in the brains of animals far from us, which is part of why researchers take it so seriously. Fruit flies show more synaptic proteins after waking and fewer after sleep, a pattern strikingly like the one seen in mammals. Sleep-like states with similar molecular signatures have been found in creatures with tiny nervous systems, suggesting the night's easing is ancient, older than the human line by many millions of years. Because so many distant species share it, the process is unlikely to be an accident of one lineage. The settling your mind does tonight is something you appear to share with nearly everything that has ever rested. You are not performing something private. You are joining something very old. Sleep deprivation reveals what the easing is, for by showing what happens without it. And the picture is specific. When the nightly downscaling is skipped, synapses stay closer to saturation, and the brain seems to lose some of its ability to separate a meaningful signal from background noise. Learning slows. Attention frais. And even simple tasks feel heavier than they should. Studies link missed deep sleep to poorer memory consolidation the following day. The fog of a sleepless night is not weakness of will. It may be a brain still holding too much, with little room left to mark what counts. The clearing you're about to do, if the idea holds, is part of what will make tomorrow legible instead of blurred. The brain may ease connections partly to balance its own budget of energy and space. Maintaining a strong synapse costs fuel continuously, and a brain that only ever added connections would grow hungrier and more crowded with each passing day. By scaling strength back at night, the brain could keep its total wiring and its running costs within sustainable limits while still learning freely by day. Researchers estimate that synaptic activity consumes a large share of the brain's energy, so trimming it is also a kind of metabolic housekeeping for the whole body. The settling of your thoughts may be, in part, your brain quietly balancing its books before morning, so that tomorrow it can afford to spend again. Downscaling may improve the signal-to-noise ratio of memory through a simple trick of uniform lowering. If you reduce every element of a crowded scene by the same proportion, the faintest clutter can drop below the level where it registers, while the strongest patterns still come through. The brain appears to apply this logic to synapses, lower them all by a similar fraction, and the incidental noise of the day may fall silent while the important structure survives. What you remember in the morning would not be louder than it was the night before. Everything around it would simply have grown quieter. In this reading, clarity is made by lowering the floor, not by lifting a chosen few above the crowd. The hippocampus and cortex appear to trade memories during this nightly settling, which adds a second act to the story. Patterns first captured quickly by the hippocampus, a fast-learning hub, are replayed during sleep and gradually woven into the slower, more durable networks of the cortex. As they transfer, the original hippocampal traces can be eased down, freeing that fast-learning region to take in tomorrow. So your most lasting memories may end up stored far from where they began. The night, in this view, is not only weakening, it is also quietly relocating what matters to steadier ground, so that the same easing which clears space in one region secures a memory in another, all while you lie still. Dreaming may ride along with this rebalancing rather than fight it. Some researchers propose that as connections are eased and certain patterns replayed, the brain stitches fragments into the loose narratives we experience as dreams. The strange, recombined quality of dreams could reflect a mind sampling and trimming its connections at the same time. This remains a hypothesis rather than a settled fact, and dreaming likely serves more than one role. But whether or not a given dream means anything to you, it may partly be a byproduct of the same housekeeping that lightens your head by morning. Even the night's odd, drifting stories may belong to the work of settling, threads spun off from a mind quietly reorganizing itself. The timing of the easing is tied to the deepest, earliest part of your night, and this shapes how rest feels. Slow wave sleep dominates the first sleep cycles, when the strongest downscaling is thought to occur, and it thins out as the night goes on. This is one reason those first hours feel so restorative, and why a night cut short at the front end can leave the mind still cluttered even after some sleep. The relief you sense after truly sleeping is not vague or imagined. It may be the felt result of synapses you spend all day strengthening, finally being allowed to relax. Most of that relaxing packed into the hours closest to when you first fell under. The same mechanism that eases connections also guards against a runaway brain. Without downscaling, repeated learning could drive synapses ever upward toward a ceiling where they can no longer change, leaving the brain unable to encode anything new. By returning strength toward a baseline each night, the brain could keep its capacity for change open-ended across a lifetime. Tomorrow, you may be able to be surprised, to take in something unexpected, precisely because tonight made room at the top. In this framing, forgetting is not the opposite of learning at all. It may be the condition that keeps learning possible, the reset that prevents a mind from filling until it can no longer bend. That reset is what is stirring in you now. Caffeine, alcohol, and stress can interfere with the night's easing by disrupting the deep sleep stages where it is thought to happen. Substances or worries that fragment slow-wave sleep may leave synapses less fully eased, which could explain the heavy, unrefreshed feeling after a restless or chemically shortened night. The brain still tries to settle, but it is interrupted mid-task, the slow waves broken before they finish their work. Understanding this can soften the frustration of a poor night, because it suggests the system was working all along, only hindered. Tonight, with nothing pulling you back toward the surface, that settling has room to run its course. Wave after uninterrupted wave, the way it is built. The easing appears selective enough to spare the skills you have practiced for years. Deeply consolidated abilities, like riding a bicycle or recognizing a loved one's face, rest on synaptic patterns so reinforced that a night of proportional trimming barely reaches them. The same process that lets a fleeting thought fade leaves your hard-won knowledge standing. This is one reason you wake as yourself and not as a blank slate. The froth of yesterday can dissolve, while the bedrock of who you are stays beneath it, largely untouched by the nightly tide. And it hints again at the answer we are circling, that height built over time is its own protection, needing no special flag to survive the dark. Piece by piece, a single shape has been forming from all of this, though the very last turn is still ahead. The brain does not seem to settle your mind by saving the day. It settles it by lowering almost all of it, trusting that what truly mattered was strong enough to remain above the line. The question we have carried, why the night eases nearly everything you learned, is nearly answered now. We can see the mechanism, the proportional scaling, the sparing of what was built tall. What we have not yet stated plainly is why this counts as keeping rather than losing. That is the one clear sentence the night has been withholding, and it is waiting just a little further down. This can explain a feeling you may know well. Waking, with yesterday's worries, smaller. An anxious loop replayed at midnight is, in part, an over-strengthened circuit, fired again and again until it towered over everything else. The night's proportional easing thins it, along with the rest of the day's connections. The problem does not vanish, but its grip may loosen through the same lowering that quiets all the day's noise. What felt enormous at 11 at night can be genuinely less loud at dawn, not because you talked yourself out of it, but because the circuit itself was eased. Your morning calm may not be denial. It could be a brain that has brought the whole day, worry included, back down to a manageable size. The rebalancing may also reshape how memories feel, not only how strong they are. As emotional experiences are replayed and eased during sleep, some research suggests the sharp emotional charge can soften, while the factual core is retained. You might keep the lesson of a hard day while losing some of its sting. In this view, the night, in lowering the connection, also files off part of its edge. This is one proposed reason why time, and especially sleep, you can let you hold difficult memories without being cut by them each time you reach. The finding is still being studied and is not fully settled, but it suggests the night's work is emotional as well as structural, tending to the weight of a memory, not just its size. The brain appears to prioritize easing where it learned the most, region by region, and this can be seen directly after intense practice with one hand. The corresponding motor areas show heightened slow-wave activity that night, as if the rebalancing crew is dispatched exactly where the day's work piled up. The settling is local and proportioned, not uniform across the cortex. Whatever consumed your day most, whether words, faces, movement, or worry, is likely where the night will work hardest while you sleep. Your mind seems to tend to itself in rough proportion to what you asked of it, without your ever directing the effort. The busiest corners of today become the quietest projects of tonight, each attended to in turn. This nightly subtraction may be why sleep feels like a true reset rather than a mere pause. A pause would simply hold the day in place until you woke. Instead, you tend to wake lighter, as if something was genuinely set down. If most of the day's excess connection was eased in the dark, then you would not carry the full accumulated weight of yesterday into today. The clean slate sensation of a good morning may not be illusion or mood. It could be the felt trace of countless connections quietly lowered while you rested. In that case, the freshness you sometimes wake into is not that you gained anything overnight. It is that you were relieved of a great deal you no longer needed to hold. The same process that seems to protect memory may also keep the brain physically stable over a lifetime. If synapses only ever grew, neural tissue would face mounting metabolic and structural strain across the decades. A slow accumulation with no release. Nightly rebalancing could spread that load across thousands of sleeps, easing a little each night so that no single day's growth becomes permanent burden. In this light, the settling you do tonight is one small payment in a debt the brain repays every night you live. Each night's quiet lowering may be part of what lets a mind remain workable across a long life, neither seizing up from overload nor erasing itself, but held in a gentle, repeating balance. Researchers can watch this rebalancing in the shrinking of synapses themselves, with tools that reach down to their physical size. Using advanced electron microscopy, studies have shown that the average size of many synaptic contacts decreases after sleep, compared with after waking, while the largest contacts change least. The connections do not merely behave as if weaker. Many are measurably smaller in the morning. So the settling of your mind has a physical body, tiny structures, vast in number, drawing themselves in a little as you rest. What you feel as relief may be real architecture, gently contracting in the dark while you do nothing at all. The night's work, in this evidence, is not a metaphor. It is measurable geometry. Not every synapse is eased, and the exceptions may finally be the point. Careful measurements suggest that a minority of the very largest connections are largely protected from the nightly trimming, changing little while the rest come down. These survivors carry the day's genuine learning forward intact, while the surrounding noise is thinned away. So the brain does not appear to spare the important by tagging each memory with a special mark. It spares them by leaving the tallest structures mostly alone and letting proportional scaling do the rest. This is the quiet resolution the whole story has been approaching. The night is not careless subtraction. It is subtraction, with the strongest few left standing, chosen by nothing more than the height they earned. The whole system runs without any conscious command from you, and that may be its deepest mercy. You do not decide which memories to ease or which to spare. You do not set the slow waves in motion or protect the tallest connections. It happens beneath awareness, the way breathing continues, while your attention is elsewhere. Every mind that sleeps does this work unsupervised. All of us trusting a process, none of us steer. The settling you long for tonight is not a task to complete or a skill to master. It is something that takes you over once you stop trying to manage it. In a moment, we will say plainly what all of this has been for. First, let the letting go continue. Notice how the thing you came here wanting, a quieter head, is already underway without your hand on it. The synapses you spent all day strengthening are beginning to draw back down. The way a tide pulls out, without anyone calling it. Something is gathering toward a single idea, that you do not have to sort the day yourself. The night is built to lighten you, and it is doing so now, in the dark behind your eyes. You can let your grip on the day's clutter loosen. The easing does not need your effort, only your stillness. What we have been moving toward is very near. This nightly rebalancing appears to have been refined by hundreds of millions of years of evolution, and that long history is itself a kind of argument. Sleep persists across the animal kingdom, despite leaving creatures still and vulnerable for hours, which strongly implies the work done in sleep is too valuable to skip. The cost of lying defenseless was paid again and again, across countless lineages, because a brain that could not ease and reset apparently could not compete. The settling your mind does tonight carries that long verdict inside it. You inherit a solution so essential that life refused to give it up, even at the steep price of surrendering consciousness every single night. That refusal is a clue to how much this quieting matters. Here is what the night has been building toward. Mechanism by mechanism, now said plainly. Your mind settles, not by clinging to the day, but by quietly lowering almost every connection you made, while sparing the tallest few, so that what deserves to remain is left standing alone. Forgetting, in this view, is not the failure of memory. It is the method of it. The brain scales the whole crowded day back down, and in that subtraction, the signals that mattered finally stand clear against the quiet. What looked from the outside like loss turns out to be the very act of keeping. The night holds what matters precisely by letting nearly everything else go. That is the answer the question has been waiting for. Right now, while you lie here, slow waves of deep sleep are likely sweeping through the brains of countless sleeping people across the world. The same easing that quiets your crowded head tonight is quieting theirs. Synaptic rebalancing is not a private trick your brain invented under pressure. It is a shared inheritance, running in newborns and elders alike, in every kind of mind. The noise you carry to bed is the noise every human brain seems to put down the same way. You are joining a vast, silent chorus of settling, and you did not have to earn your place in it. You have only to lie still, while the same old process moves through you as it moves through them. Having seen the whole shape, notice one detail again. The brain does not ease its connections at random. Slow wave activity presses hardest on the synapses that grew strongest during the day, lowering them by a proportional share, while the faintest are touched only lightly or slip away. This keeps the relative pattern of your learning intact, even as the overall volume falls. So the crowding you feel now is not being erased. It is being turned down, gently and fairly, so the shape of what you learned can still stand beneath the quiet. Knowing the rule, you can trust it a little more. The night is not deciding your worth. It is applying one even, ancient measure to everything you gathered, and letting the tall remain tall. Researchers reached this picture partly by sampling the molecular machinery of synapses across sleep and waking. After sleep, the proteins that mark a synapse as strong are measurably reduced across most connections, then rebuilt again through the next day. The day raises them, the night brings them back toward baseline. This is one physical trace of forgetting at work, visible under the tools of a lab rather than only felt in a quiet morning. So what registers to you as a head slowly emptying is, in tissue, a chemical settling that has been observed and measured. The relief is not imaginary and not merely mood. It has a molecular signature, a quiet lowering of the very markers your busy day spent all its hours building up. This nightly easing is not a sign that something in you is failing. It is the maintenance that lets learning continue at all. Without it, synapses would keep climbing towards saturation, leaving little room to take in tomorrow. In that sense, the brain forgets in order to stay able to remember, the two held in a single balance. The restlessness you feel at bedtime is often just a brain still full, waiting for the room that sleep is about to make. There is nothing wrong with arriving here crowded. It is the expected end of a day of learning, and it is exactly the condition the night is equipped to meet. The fullness is not the obstacle to rest. It is the raw material rest works on. The few connections that survive the night are usually the ones reinforced more than once, or bound to something that mattered. Repetition, and meaning act like depth, holding certain synapses tall, while the broad easing passes over the rest and lowers them further. So the night is not careless with your day, and it is not merciless either. It is selective by design. Though the selection needs no chooser, it lets go of the 1,000 passing impressions to preserve the handful you would actually want to keep, simply because those few stand taller than the flood. Tonight, the moments that reached you are already the tallest shapes in the field, and the tallest are the ones the dark leaves standing. This may be why a problem you could not solve at night sometimes feels clear in the morning. As the clutter of competing connections is eased down, the signal that matters is left with less to compete against. Nothing new was added while you slept. Something was quietly taken away from around it. The clarity you wake into can be the sound of a room grown quiet, where the one important thought is finally the loudest thing left in it. So the answer that arrives at dawn was not built overnight by effort. It was uncovered by subtraction, the way a shape appears when the noise around it drops. You did nothing but sleep, and the field around the thought simply thinned until it stood out plainly. The same mechanism runs in the brain of nearly every creature that sleeps, from mice to elephants to the smallest songbird. Across species separated by tens of millions of years, deep sleep appears to ease the day's connections to make space for the next. This is not a human peculiarity or a modern affliction. It looks like one of the oldest solutions life found for the problem of a mind that keeps filling. So you are doing tonight what living brains have done across an immense stretch of time, long before there were words for any of it. The heaviness in your eyes is a very old signal, and the quieting that follows it is an even older answer, one you were born already, knowing how to give. A crowded, racing mind at bedtime is, in large part, a mind that has not yet begun its easing. The very fullness that makes it hard to settle is the raw material the night is about to work on, not a barrier to it. Once slow-wave sleep takes hold, the volume drops on its own, without any decision from you. So you do not have to clear your head before sleep. Sleep is the clearing. The noise you notice now is simply waiting its turn to be quieted. The way a loud room grows, still once the lights go down. There is no preparation left to do, no thought to finish first. The crowd in your head is not keeping you from rest. It is the first thing rest will attend to. The brain even seems to prepare for this handover as you grow drowsy. The chemistry that kept your synapses primed for learning begins to shift, and the conditions that favor easing take over. The move from a day brain that strengthens to a night brain that lowers is not abrupt. It is a slow changeover. You can almost feel as your thoughts begin to loosen and blur. That very loosening you may be noticing right now is the changeover beginning, the balance tipping quietly from taking in toward letting go. You do not have to push it along or wait impatiently for it. It arrives on its own chemistry, in its own time, and its first sign is exactly the softening you feel behind your eyes. It is worth saying clearly that easing does not flatten everything to nothing. It lowers the whole landscape while keeping its contours. A memory worth keeping is not necessarily made stronger in absolute terms overnight. It is made stronger relative to the quieted rest around it. In that sense, forgetting and remembering turn out to be two views of the same act. The night keeps what matters, not by guarding each precious thing, but by softening everything around it until the important stands out, by contrast. So when you wake tomorrow lighter, the few things still clear will be clear, not because they grew louder in the dark, but because the whole crowd around them was gently, evenly turned down. This may be why sleep deprivation muddies thinking so quickly. Without the night's easing, yesterday's connections stay loud and tangle with today's, and the brain runs short on contrast between them. Everything can start to feel equally urgent, equally crowded, because nothing was lowered to let anything else stand out. The relief of a good night's sleep is not only rest for a tired body. It may be the return of contrast, the difference between signal and noise, quietly restored. A clear mind, in this reading, is a mind that was allowed to forget on schedule. So the grogginess of a sleepless night is not just fatigue. It can be the felt cost of a rebalancing that never got the hours to run. The crowded feeling you brought to bed is not a flaw in you. It is the expected state of a brain at the end of a full day, precisely the state the night is built to meet. There is nothing to fix, and nothing you did wrong by arriving here noisy and overfull. The fullness is normal. The settling is automatic. You and your restless head are exactly on schedule, doing what every learning mind does when the day is done. So you can set down the small effort of trying to be calm. The calm is not something you produce tonight. It is something the night produces in you, once you stop standing in its way and simply let the descent begin. What the night has shown, piece by piece, is that your brain does not keep the day by clutching at it. It keeps the day by letting almost all of it go and sparing only the tallest few. The easing is not loss working against you. It is the very process that decides what stays. The question of why the brain lowers so much of what you learned has answered itself along the way. It lowers the many, so the few can finally be heard clearly against the quiet, knowing that you can stop guarding your memories tonight. They are not in danger from the dark. The dark is where they are sorted and secured, gently and without your help, exactly as they have been every night before. And the few that remain are not chosen by effort or worry. You cannot lie awake deciding which memories to save. That work happens below you, in the slow rhythm of sleep itself, following rules older than any intention. The connections that will endure were already made tall by meaning and repetition long before you closed your eyes tonight. So, there is nothing left to sort now. The sorting is being done for you, kindly and automatically. by height alone, you can release the impulse to hold on to everything, because holding on was never what saved the things that lasted. They lasted by standing taller than the flood, and the flood is already beginning, quietly, to recede. So here is what all of this has gathered toward. In the plainest words, your mind does not settle at night by holding everything tighter. It settles by loosening its grip on nearly all of it, trusting that what truly matters has already been anchored by its own strength. The crowded head is not a problem the night fails to solve. It is the night's starting point, the very thing it was shaped to meet. Forgetting is not the enemy of a quiet mind. Forgetting, "I done this way," is how the quiet arrives. And it is arriving in you now, on its own, wave by wave, asking nothing of you but that you let it. The day is loosening its hold, and you are allowed to let it. Notice what this means for you tonight. You are not responsible for emptying your own head before sleep. Every other brain on this planet hands the job to the night, and yours is no different. The half-thoughts and fragments crowding you now are not yours to wrestle down one by one. They are the night's, to gently quiet, on a schedule you do not have to keep. So you can stop trying to manage the noise, stop bracing against it, stop willing it to stop. The mechanism that manages it is already switching on behind your closed eyes. Your only task, if it is even a task, is to lie still and let a very old process take the day off your hands. The same slow waves smoothing your thoughts tonight have smoothed the thoughts of everyone who ever lay down tired and overfull. The exhausted parent, the worried student, the restless stranger, far across the world, all of them met the same crowded mind, and all of them were carried through it by the same quiet process. In this, at least, no one is truly alone. The settling is shared, running in parallel through countless heads tonight, each one letting the day go by the same ancient rule. So the loneliness a racing mind can bring at night is, in one sense, en illusion. What feels most private about your restlessness is the very thing you have most deeply in common with every sleeper alive. There is a strange comfort in knowing the brain trusts itself to forget. It does not cling to certainty about which moments will matter later. It lets the night decide again and again, over a lifetime of sleeps, by the simple rule of what stood tallest. That trust is built into the tissue itself, not into any choice you make. Tonight, your brain will once more let go of almost everything, confident that what should remain will, because it was built to remain. You can borrow that confidence and let go too. If your own brain does not lie awake, worrying which memory to save, then perhaps you can loosen your grip as well, and trust the same quiet process that has never once failed to carry you to morning. The fragments that feel so loud right now will mostly not survive the night, and that is mercy, not loss. The offhand comment, the unfinished worry, the stray image caught from the day. Most will be eased into silence by the time you wake. What stays will be quieter and truer, the few shapes that stood tall enough to last. So the mind you wake into tomorrow will be lighter, precisely because tonight it was allowed to release what it did not need to carry forward. You are not losing anything you will miss. You are being unburdened of a great weight of passing detail, so that the morning can begin uncrowded, with only the things worth keeping still gently in place. This is the oldest kind of housekeeping a mind can do, older than language, older than memory, as we name it. Long before anyone understood why, every sleeping brain was already lightening its load each night, so it could meet the next day open and ready. You inherit that nightly lightening unearned, without instruction, without effort. It asks nothing of you but to lie down and let the slow waves come in their own time. So the rest you are sinking toward now is not a modern skill or a trick to master. It is the most ancient thing your brain knows how to do, a quieting older than thought itself, and it is beginning in you exactly as it has begun in sleepers for millions of years. And so the crowded head you arrived with is not a wall between you and sleep. It is simply the day, still settling, still waiting its turn to be lowered. As the easing spreads, the fragments lose their edge. The half-thoughts soften, and the noise that would not switch off begins, on its own, to switch off. You did not have to find the switch or reach for it in the dark. Your sleeping brain has always known where it is, and it is finding it now, without any help from you. So let the crowd stay, as it is a moment longer. It is not keeping you awake. It is the last of the day, quietly being set down while you rest. Every mind in here works this way. The privacy of your own racing thoughts can feel like a place no one else has ever been, but the machinery beneath them is shared by every human who has ever slept. The way your night quiets you is the way it quiets us all, by the same slow waves, the same gentle lowering, the same old rule of what stands tallest. So you are not strange for arriving full, and you are not alone in being carried through to quiet. Whatever singular weight you brought to this hour, the process that will lift it is entirely ordinary and entirely reliable. It has met crowded minds like yours every night, for as long as there have been minds to crowd. Tomorrow, you may not remember most of what crowded you tonight, and you will not miss it. But forgetting is not the night failing to keep your day. It is the night keeping you by clearing the way for what comes next. The lightness you will feel is the room that was made while you slept. Room the slow waves opened by letting the rest go. So when you wake with much of tonight already faded, do not mistake it for something lost. It is the visible sign that the process worked, that the flood receded and left the few solid stones behind. The emptiness of a clear morning is not a lack. It is space, quietly, returned to you overnight. There is nothing left for you to do now. The easing has begun. The fragments are already loosening, and the few things that matter are already held safe below the surface by their own strength. The crowded mind is emptying itself the way it always has, without your effort, without your worry, on a schedule older than you. All that remains is to rest inside a process that has cared for sleeping minds since long before yours drew breath. So let your hands grow heavy, your jaw unclench, your thoughts keep loosening. You are not overseeing anything tonight. You are being carried, wave by slow wave, by something that has never once needed your permission to begin, and never once failed to see it through. Tonight, you do not have to quiet your own head. The night is doing it for you, the way it has for every mind that ever lay down too full to think. Let the noise go. It was never yours to silence. By morning, almost all of it will have softened into nothing, and the little that matters will still be there, waiting, quiet, and whole. You can finally set the day down, all of it, the loud and the faint alike, and trust the dark to sort what stays. You are not the one who has to keep it. That work is already underway inside you, gentle and sure, and your only part now is to let go, and sink, and sleep. By the time the night reaches this point, your brain has already begun the very work we followed across these hours. We saw how slow-wave sleep eases down the strongest connections of the day, touching the lightest ones least, so the shape of your learning survives the quieting. We saw how a problem unsolved at night can clear by morning, not because anything was added, but because so much was taken away. What looked at first like the brain discarding your day turned out to be the brain protecting it, choosing the few that matter by gently releasing the many that do not. You came in carrying a crowded head, and you can leave knowing that fullness was never a failing. It was the night's starting point. The settling you longed for is not something you have to make happen. It is something happening to you, right now. If something in these hours helped your own crowded mind grow quieter, you might leave a few words below, so the next person arriving full and restless knows this place was made for nights like theirs. And if you would like more of these slow walks through the mind's quiet science, this channel will keep them coming, one calm hour at a time. Picture the day's countless connections as lights scattered across a dark field, slowly dimming one by one as the night moves through them. That same dimming is moving through you now, lowering the noise without asking anything of you. Let your entire being dissolve into that gentle lowering, into the slow waves that are already smoothing the crowded edges of your mind. There is no head left to clear. The clearing is what is holding you. Let what mattered settle quietly into place, and let everything else go dark and soft. Let the last of the day dim, like those scattered lights, fading on their own with no hand on the switch. Let your breath grow long and unhurried, each one a little farther from the one before. There is nothing to keep tonight, nothing to sort, nothing to hold. The few things that matter are already anchored safe below you, and the rest is free to drift away into the dark. The Deep Sleep with Mind Science playlist has been quietly carrying tired minds through nights like this one. And the next video carries this stillness further. That video is waiting whenever you are ready. So, let your eyes stay closed and your thoughts keep loosening wherever a fragment still flickers. Let it dim, the way the night has always dimmed them for you. Quiet one, you are not the one who has to keep the day. Rest now, and let the night settle your mind for you. Good night, and sleep deeply.